Welcome, Bronco Nation, my game preview for Boise State versus San Jose State. The 8-1 Boise State Broncos checking in at number 13, slight pull drop after the scare last week, taking on the 6-3 San Jose State Spartans at San Jose State. This will be a 5 p.m. Mountain Central Time game on Saturday, CBS Sports Network. Boise State favored, but not by as much as they might have been per Vegas. 13.5-point favorite. So obviously the game last week on national television, everybody watched it. It was a game that I think gave people a little bit of some questions, some concerns about Boise State that they will be having to answer in this matchup to prove that last week was a fluke. And so Boise State coming into this game with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, within a 2-score advantage, but closer prediction than even on the ESPN side, 83.4% chance. That's pretty close compared to what we've seen across the board for Boise State games, at least in conference outside of UNLV this season. So Boise State dropping a spot and also coming in as a little bit of a closer matchup. This will be a Boise State team that's going to be very, very motivated to go out and get that win. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the series history between these two teams. We're going to look at the key players for both Boise State and San Jose State. So, hey, any San Jose State fans that have stumbled onto the channel, there will be some stuff in this video for you as well, and also for Bronco Nation to get to know the San Jose State players. And then we're going to look at keys to the game for Boise State, what they need to do to win, and then we will wrap up with a summary and the score predictions. As always, score predictions, make sure you go put your score predictions in the comments below. I will be shouting out anybody who gets the score exactly right. So if there's multiple people with the right score, I'll get them all shouted out. However, if nobody gets it exactly right, I'm just going to shout out whoever gets it closest. So pause the video, go down below, give me your score predictions, give me your thoughts on the game. Maybe you still have some residual feelings from last week that you want to talk about. That's fine too. Any thoughts you have on the matchup, I try to get through, and I'm pretty good overall getting to every single comment and leaving at least some form of reply. And the more comment you give me, the more I have to work with in a response. So let me know your thoughts on this matchup. You can always come back at the end of the video and add at the end. So let's get into this one then. So series history between these two teams, it's been a pretty unmatched there. Boise State has held this series well, 15-1 overall. Really not much of a competition overall. Boise State winning the first ever game in 1978, 30-15 on the blue. And then Boise State and San Jose State would reconvene the matchup in 2001 and play for 10 straight years until Boise State jumped to the Mountain West. First game in 2001, a 56-6 point win, and then most of the games were blowouts. However, there were a couple of close games in the series. Notably, 2004 was a shootout, 56-49. And then 2006 was very memorable. Obviously, there's a lot of things about that 2006 season that are very memorable. But 2006, San Jose State was the stumbling block. They were the trap game. They were the one that nobody really expected Boise State to struggle against. They had to go play at San Jose State. And Boise State eked a win out in that game, 23-20. Took a game-winning field goal. Ian Johnson put his life on the line in that game, took multiple injuries, actually had to go to the hospital and come back. He was approved to come back, and then he had to go back to the hospital afterwards. Crazy stories. He believed that he punctured his left or his right lung, broke several ribs in that game, was out for a week or two. That was a very, very close game that I think a lot of Boise State fans remember. And so hopefully San Jose State is not another trap game. I think after this last matchup, this last weekend, I don't think they're going to be able to sneak in under the radar. Boise State's going to be pretty well prepared. But who knows? They did play potential spoiler once. Didn't quite get it done in 2006. Could they do it again this year? Who knows? 2015, then Boise State reconvened again once San Jose State joined the Mountain West. That win was 40-23, and then they won in 16 and 19 as well. And then 2020, San Jose State finally got their first win in the series. One of the last, at that point, Mountain West teams to have never beaten Boise State. And they did it in the Mountain West Championship game. Now, of course, that was the COVID season. Brian Harsin was on the edge of leaving. There were a lot of things going on. George Halani was injured. He'd been injured for most of the season. Boise State was on their third string. Maybe Hank Bachmeier had come back in at that point. But that was a lot of weird stuff going on. Needless to say, San Jose State won 22-34. And then Boise State won the last matchup in 2023, 35-27. Now, however, that game is also a little bit interesting to talk about because that one San Jose State almost got their first, what I would probably call legitimate win, non-COVID win against Boise State on the blue. Boise State was down at one point in that game, 27-7. I got a great opportunity to talk to one of the participants in that game, who is now on the team, one of the Steele brothers. It was awesome being able to talk with him about his memories of that game. It's fantastic that he is now part of Boise State and a contributor now with many injuries on the offensive line. Boise State has had an opportunity to go into their depth a little bit, and so they have both been able to make a contribution this season. And I'm going to put a link, actually, because they just released a t-shirt, and I'm going to put a link to it in the description of this video. Make sure you guys go check that. They got other products too. They got a sweatshirt, and they've got sizes for men, women, children. Make sure you go into the description of the video and click on that link. I'm excited to buy mine here soon. But needless to say, Boise State was down 27-7 in that game, and that was the last, at halftime, 27-7. That was the last point San Jose State scored. Boise State led a ferocious comeback on the blue to win that game 35-27. One of the few bright spots last year prior to Andy Avalos being terminated at the program and what Boise State did afterwards. But that was one of those few bright spots for Boise State, and this has not been an easy series the last couple of games. And so San Jose State with a chance to challenge Boise here. They really absolutely do. Again, 6-3 overall. They have one of the best players in the conference. Not the best player, because we have that guy, but they have one of the best players. And so let's look at the key players to the game here, because there's a lot of players on both sides of the ball, both Boise State and San Jose State. They're going to have a significant impact, and it is going to be interesting to see probably the two best. Definitely Ashton Jeanty and Nick Nash with a strong case for it. Two of the best players in the conference, in the group of 5 in college football right now, going head-to-head in this one, at least from their different offensive sides. And so key players looking for Boise State. Number one key player for me is going to be starting off quarterback Maddox Madsen. Down week last week. He admitted it. He said it was his worst game. Statistically, it was his worst game. And he you know that he wants to get better. But last week, again, not up to his standard or to Boise State standard, something the fans definitely let him know. 9 of 20, 45%, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Should have been 3. I've got 1 called back because of a bad call by the referees on pass interference that was not pass interference, and then 1 that was dropped, luckily by the receiver, but I mean by the defender. But I mean, he had it. It was overturned in replay that he was kind of bobbling the ball as he went out of bounds. But that was a close one there. He added 58 yards rushing on the ground, but not his best performance. However, it is an anomaly for him this season. 1,908 yards passing, down to 62.4% after that 45%. But again, that is an anomaly. He did have a 40% or 45, somewhere in that range, percentage completion versus Oregon, but there's a lot of other things going on. Overall, his completion percentage has been pretty strong. And then what he's really been strong on is his touchdowns, 18, and then his interceptions, only 3 on the year, and 5 sacks allowed. Did not take a sack last week. And then he has really been stepping up in the running game. 28 rushes, 179 yards, which, believe it or not, is second on the team in rushing right now. And long of 49 and 2 touchdowns. Compare that to 2023, playing in more limited action. He only had 120 yards rushing and a 3.6 yard average. He's averaging 6.4 yard average per carry, which is only a yard short what Ashton Jeanty is averaging on carry. Again, I'm not saying that Maddox Madsen is anywhere near the runner of Ashton Jeanty, but it is interesting to note that it is a significant portion of his game that he's been leaning into more heavily recently. I think we could see him continue to push that role versus San Jose State and the rest of the season. But regardless, Maddox Madsen is my key player number 1, because we're going to talk about it when we get to the key plays, keys to the success for Boise State. But you really need him to have a big game if you want Boise State to be dominant. Ashton Jeanty is the core and soul of this team. You're going to win with him. But if you want to dominate, and that's what you need to do, if you want to present a complete team like Boise State has done for the most part this season, you need Maddox Madsen to perform well. And you can tell after a game like last week, where it was not up to his standards, he's going to be motivated to come into this one. And then that brings us to Ashton Jeanty, who, like we said, is the core of this offense. 1,735 yards rushing, 7.7 yard average, long of 77, 23 touchdowns. Also 19 receptions for 93 yards and a touchdown. Definitely an area he could be utilized more in. He was open quite a bit last week, and Maddox Madsen just didn't look to him. Again, game he was off overall. But that's an opportunity that he could be used more efficiently, is in the passing game, and maybe we will see Boise State emphasizing that a little bit more versus San Jose State this week. But he had his 4th 200-yard rushing game of the season last week, and he also had his first 3 touchdown performance since Utah State. So he'd had a 3-game hiatus there where he he did not have 3 touchdowns or more in a game, and then last week he was able to get 3 touchdowns versus Nevada. And then my key player number 3, we're going to lean onto the defense here. Obviously, Alexander Tubner taking an injury. I have no idea what the status of that is. Spencer Danielson is still saying that they're going to be appraising that, looking into the severity of that injury. But that's your field general there. He's the guy that wears the green dot. I don't know who's taking over for the green dot, but a player who is going to be taking over as a more significant role is going to be safety Zion Washington. Now, Boise State's been rotating a little bit at safety. Alexander Tubner has been on the field for the most part throughout the season. However, Boise State's had all 3 of their top tacklers are all safeties. Benefield, Tubner, and Washington. And Washington's right there at number 3 with 43 tackles, 5 passes defended. He's only second to McCoy in passes defended, and 1 forced fumble. I've been really impressed by what Zion Washington has put on the field. He's had some bad moments, like I think everybody on the team has, but overall, I've thought he has played really, really well, and he's come up big in some very big kind of open field type situations and third downs this season. So expect him to have a bigger role now that Tubner is going to be sidelined for the foreseeable future right now, and hopefully we'll get an update on him soon. But expect Zion Washington and obviously Ty Benefield as well to both step up and have a bigger role. Boise State's going to need someone to step up and take over that leadership position in the secondary there, and the safety is kind of where the eyes go. And so hopefully Zion Washington can step up into the role that he's already carved out for himself this year and take a little bit of a bigger responsibility coming through at least into this next game. Now, looking at San Jose State, they have a great player in a wide receiver in Nick Nash, but they need somebody to throw the ball to him, and that has been a little bit of a controversy and discussion point this year because they really don't have an established quarterback right now. Their number 1 quarterback is Emmett Brown. As far as passing yards and the starting quarterback coming into the season, as a Washington State transfer, 1,621 yards passing, 57.6% completion percentage, so low numbers there, 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and 7 sacks. However, they have been struggling recently. San Jose State opened up the season 4-1, looked very, very strong, only lost very, very close one to Washington State right before the Boise State game, actually. But then they've been 2-2 the stretch after that, and they've really struggled, and they've started to go to Walker Eget, and I might be messing up that last name. I think it's Eget. It might be Eget. I'm just going to say Eget because that sounds, that's what I think it is. But hey, San Jose State fans, feel free to correct me in the comments. I do apologize if I'm saying that name wrong. But they've been going to him. It's been a little bit of a split quarterback competition, both of these guys getting reps in games. I know Boise State fans get a little bit of a PTSD twitch when we start hearing the word quarterback competition and a dual quarterback system, but that's what San Jose State has been running a little bit so far this year. Eget stepping up with 1,312 yards passing so far, 56.4% completion percentage, so not much better in that area, and 3 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, so a little bit less reliable as far as keeping the ball out of the enemy's hands, and but he's only taken 2 sacks. And now Eget, last week, there was no quarterback split. Every other game going back, last few at least, there was a quarterback split in playing time. Well, last week, in a loss versus Oregon State, San Jose State took on and played the entire game with Eget. He was their player for the entire matchup. So we'll have to see who they end up running with. Last week in a win versus Oregon State. I said loss, but it was a win versus Oregon State. He ended up taking over and being the starting quarterback for the entire matchup in that one. So we will have to see who ends up being the primary. I would expect that if Eget struggles, then Brown might get a chance to come back in. It'll be all up to the Boise State secondary to maybe decide who gets playing time in this one. And then you have to look at the key player, though. The number 1 key player that they're throwing the ball to, either quarterback, the target doesn't change. It's Nick Nash. This entire offense pretty much is built around him. He was going to transfer, and then Niumatalolo said, no, wait, we are going to make this a passing offense. I'm not bringing the option from Navy. This is built around you. We need you to stay as part of this program. And so then the offense has been definitely focused on getting Nash the ball, and they've done it quite successfully. 1,156 yards overall, 13.4 yard average, 13 touchdowns. He's also thrown twice on trick plays for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, a key contributor that Boise State will have to stop. Now, talking about stopping, that will come down to Jordan Pollard. He's going to be the guy primarily responsible for trying to stop Ashton Jeanty, and good luck to you, sir. But he is an impressive athlete. He definitely is. 82 tackles. He's 25th in the country, 6th overall in Mountain West. Mountain West actually has quite a few impressive defensive players this season. But he's 25th overall in the country for tackles, 82 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 passes defended, an interception. So he's also a role player in the coverage game as well. And that's going to be a guy that he's going to definitely, that San Jose State's going to turn to try and stop Ashton Jeanty. Now, whether or not they can stop Ashton Jeanty is going to come down, I think, a lot to the keys to the game here. And that's going to come down to key number 1, which actually is going to be establishing Maddox Matson's arm, because whether or not they can stop Ashton Jeanty is going to be how effective this passing game is. If they can key off, if Boise State is coming out uncertain, if Maddox Matson is playing scared in this game, if the memory of the game versus Nevada is impacting him and the passing game's not a threat, San Jose State's going to be able to key off on the running game. Like I said, Boise State can win with Ashton Jeanty. He is the key to them winning throughout the season. But for Boise State to dominate, which is what they need in this game, especially coming off of a slip there, going down to number 13 in the polls, if they want a chance to dominate, they need to have Maddox Matson's arm established. And there is a tendency after you have a down performance to lean into what you know you do well. You've got one guy who's hot, Ashton Jeanty. You've got one guy who's had a down performance, Maddox Matson. And there can be a tendency to lean into the hot hand. And you definitely should continue to feed Ashton Jeanty here. But there's too much opportunity versus San Jose State to just go focused on the run game. 235.9 yards passing per game allowed this season defensively for San Jose State. A sizable number in the rushing game as well, 151.2 yards rushing per game. So there definitely will be opportunities there. However, the passing number is interesting to look at because they haven't played a ton of super pass-heavy programs. I mean, obviously they played Washington State, but overall they haven't played a ton of super pass-heavy teams. They played Kennesaw State, who's terrible and not super pass efficient. They played Air Force, who we know who Air Force is. And then they played Oregon State, who Oregon State has really, really struggled. They actually just had to switch up their quarterbacks. They've really, really struggled this season. And Oregon State had their second most passing yards of the season versus San Jose State. They had 292 yards passing, which is the second most that they've had all season long. And so there are opportunities here. I think the vulnerabilities in the passing game against San Jose State are actually going to even be even more apparent than what is actually showing on the statistics, because I think some of those are hidden by San Jose State playing some programs that just aren't that efficient at passing. But even the ones that aren't, again, Oregon State struggling this year, a lot of injuries across the board, threw for almost 300 yards. Imagine what a Boise State team with a better offensive line, with a better quarterback, and with a deeper wide receiver core could potentially do versus San Jose State. And so there's going to be opportunities there. But you need to reestablish the confidence and trust in Maddox Matson. And the confidence and trust with Maddox Matson in this wide receiver core. Last week, Boise State threw to only one wide receiver. Well, they threw to multiple, but they only completed a pass to one wide receiver. 3 players caught passes. One was a tight end and Louder, one was Ashton Jeanty, and one was Cam Camper, and that's it. That is as far as I know, and I will be honest, got a little busy, was not able to go game by game through every single game of Boise State, going back into the far distant past there to see. But as far as I am aware, that is the first time that Boise State has completed only to one wide receiver in a game. And again, as far as I'm aware of Boise State history, I definitely have no memory of one. And I've watched pretty much every Boise State game in its entirety going back the last 15 plus years. So it's been a while if it has ever happened before, and Boise State needs to reestablish that confidence in Maddox Matson. They need to reestablish that confidence for him, but they also need to reestablish that confidence and that timing between the wide receivers, because a little bit of trust was broken last week. A lot of circumstances. We talked about the rivalry element in the review, but there was a little bit of a loss of trust there in the inability of the wide receivers to get open and the inability of Maddox Matson to get the ball to them throughout the game. And so this is an opportunity versus San Jose State that has some vulnerabilities to reestablish Maddox Matson so that the running game can flourish to its maximum potential. And then key number 2 here is going to be a defensive key. It's going to be to shut down Nash. We talked about how key he is into this offense. But to put it in a little bit of perspective here, his 1,200 total yards, so if you count his passing yards and his receiving yards, his 1,200 total yards of offense are 40% of the passing offense for San Jose State. And his total offense on this, including rushing yards, so total offense for San Jose State overall, is 31%. So he's responsible for 31% of the total offense and 40% of the passing offense. Now, San Jose State does have some other guys. They do. They have Lockhart, who's had 38 receptions, and then they have a series of other players who've had between 15 and 20 receptions. But Nash has been their number one target. We mentioned Lockhart, 38. He's the second leading receiver for receptions this season. Nash is 86. San Jose State has completed 212 receptions. 86 of them, almost half, just under half, went to Nash. If you can shut down Nash, you're going to shut down this San Jose State offense. Now, that is a high task. Even in their losses, he has still performed well. So the key to winning is not necessarily shutting down Nash, because you might not be able to do it. But if Boise State can have an opportunity to shut down Nash, and more specifically shut down the deep ball, they have 4 receivers who are averaging 15-plus yards per reception. Nash versus Oregon State averaged 26.8 yards receiving. If Boise State can do that, they're going to be a long way towards winning this game, especially if the offense is able to step up. Now, before Nevada, Boise State secondary had been much maligned coming into the season, had actually taken a step in the right direction. Now, after Nevada, there's a lot of people complaining about the secondary, but when you look at what Boise State's secondary has done in the second half of the season, they held San Diego State to their second lowest passing numbers of the season. They held UNLV to, at what was at their time, the lowest passing numbers of their season. And while Hawaii definitely had yards all over the place, because they're a pass-only offense, so everything is going to flow through the pass and the run and shoot, they held Hawaii to 5 of 14 on third down and 1 of 3 on fourth down conversions. And even versus Nevada, they held them to under 200 yards passing. It was like 188 yards passing for Lewis, 3 of 14 on third down. The number that definitely stood out was the fourth down conversions, where they were 3 of 4. But even versus Nevada, you take away the 44-yard trick play, they hold them to under 200 yards passing and 3 of 14 on third down. And so there were moments given up, but overall, they played well. Now, I will say they definitely got lucky. There were a couple of plays where the wide receivers for Nevada just dropped the pass. They had it in their hands, and so there's a little bit of luck playing in. They took a step. The secondary definitely took a step down, a step back, just like the passing game did, just like special teams did. All the areas for Boise State that have been on the rise, have been fixing themselves throughout this season, all took a step back versus UNR. A big part of that being the rivalry element at play. But Boise State's a chance for the secondary to reestablish themselves, to prove that the turning of the page that we have seen the last 3 games, the back half of the season, is real, that it has been established, that they are a stronger unit, that they are a strength and not a weakness of this defense. It's an opportunity for them to prove themselves, and they're going to need to, because San Jose State, if they can start completing these passes to Nash, if they can get in tune in the passing game and start dealing these moral blows to Boise State and start building some energy on their end, some momentum shifting plays, it's a chance for them to knock them off. And Boise State's vulnerable right now, and there's a chance that they could knock them off if Boise State's defense is not able to step up. And so establishing Max Vance's arm, key number 1, and key number 2, shutting down Nash, and more specifically shutting down that deep passing game, which has been Boise State's somewhat kryptonite so far this year. And then key number 3 is, we've touched on it so far already, but prove that the Nevada game was an anomaly, a 28-21. But since Georgia Southern, a 56-45 point win, Boise State has beaten 5 teams by 20 plus. The only other 2 games in that stretch that were less than that was a 29-24 win versus a good UNLV team, and it was a win, and then a 3-point loss versus Oregon, where honestly they could have beat them by 2 touchdowns if not for 2 errors on special teams. But they've beaten 5 teams by 20 plus points. That is the norm for Boise State, not 28-21 that we saw last week. 20 plus point wins is the norm. The game versus Nevada is an anomaly, and it was because of the rivalry element. But the reason that it was a step back points wise is because it was a step back in all the areas that Boise State had struggled at times this season, all combined into a perfect storm. And Boise State was definitely lucky to get away with a win there, definitely relying on Ash and Genty. But the passing game, again, passing game that has stepped up and played so well. I mean, coming off of a career high in passing yards for Max Madison, a season high in passing last week versus San Diego State. takes a step back and has a bad performance. A special teams that it fixed what most of the errors, most of the issues that we'd seen. Some experimentation in the kicking game versus San Diego State, but overall, Boise State, it seemed to fix those problems. Their coverage unit was playing well. They were finding themselves in the return game, and then a disaster, a nightmare fuel, special teams wise. Long returns given up, fumbles on kick return. It was a mess across the board. And then the secondary as well, again, getting lucky, but also giving up quite a few big plays. Again, that was a game that for Boise State was uncharacteristic, but they need to prove that it was uncharacteristic, because the Nevada game, here's the truth for any fans that are still whining and bemoaning the results of last week, which, to remind everybody, was a win, because I think that some of the reactions have given an indication from an outside perspective that it was not a win, but to remind everybody it was a win, does not hurt you. The results of that game do not hurt you if you prove that it is not the team that you are here on the back end of the season. To the committee, to the CFP committee, it doesn't hurt you. They kept you at 13. Army and Navy are still at the bottom. Sorry, Army and Tulane, the other group of 5 challengers, are at the bottom end of the spectrum here. But if you start to replicate that performance, the good work that you've done so far this season is going to slip away, and they're going to see you as the team that you presented yourself on the back end. And so, again, they're not going to judge Nevada because they take the total perspective of the season as a whole. However, if you then go and play like we did versus UNR this week versus San Diego State, and then Wyoming, and then Oregon State, even if you get away with wins, it is going to hurt you in the rankings. And they've shown that they're not going to have a lot of tolerance for pulling off close wins versus bad teams. And they're not going to super punish you by dropping you multiple slots, but you're going to continue to descend. And at a certain point, you're going to start to get into competition with teams like Army and Tulane, which now have a possibility of playing each other as ranked teams at the end of the season. And that's a little bit of a competition there. Boise State's not going to play, probably not going to play a ranked Mountain West team. And so, but these teams will have an opportunity to get a top 25 win versus themselves at the end of the year. And so Boise State has to prove to the committee that this was a fluke. They need to prove it to the fans that it was a fluke. A lot of the fan base right now is a very short memory for the Boise State fans. They kind of remember whatever happened last week, and Keeley, the most negative thing that has happened recently. And so if you are on Boise State socials, whether that's on Twitter, to a certain extent Facebook, in comment sections of YouTube channels, it feels like Boise State is still in the Avalos era. And I think that's why we are keying off on the negatives, because the last 3 years we've been so steeped in them. And I think that's why we are maybe putting a little bit of a bigger spotlight on a one game than we should. However, the fan base is going to start getting a little nervous. And you want buy-in. You want the sellouts. You want the massive buy-in that has propelled Boise State so far this season. And a big win versus San Jose State is going to go a long way to calming those fears. And then more importantly than any of the previous two is proving it to yourself as a Boise State team. Coming in here and proving that you're still a dominant program, a dominant squad, that the team we've seen all year is the team that you still are. That's important. It's important to the mentality of how these players play, how they prepare, coming in and proving that they are dominant every single week on the field. This is an opportunity for them to prove it to themselves. And so three keys to the game there: establish Matson's arm, shut down Nash, and prove that the UNR game was an anomaly. So summarizing this game off overall, we looked at what San Jose State has been doing defensively. Offensively, like we said, it's the passing game. That's their focus. Not just because Nash, but just the way this offense is schemed up overall. Spread option offense. The running game is not a big player. This is going to be a pass-heavy attack. A lot of throws to the perimeter, a lot of 5 wide sets. They're going to spread Boise State out, and they're going to challenge. Boise State's going to have to play some islands out there. They're going to have to play some one-on-ones, and they're going to challenge the zone scheme. And Boise State's rush defense may not be as effective. This is a San Jose State team that gets the ball out very quickly, has not taken a lot of sacks, regardless of which quarterback is out there. 2 sacks versus Eget and 7 sacks versus Brown. 9 sacks on the season. They're pretty good overall getting that ball out. So Boise State is not necessarily going to be able to rely on just the pass rush, forcing a lost yardage situation, maybe a bad throw, but they're not necessarily going to be able to rely on getting the quarterback consistently every single time. 332.3 yards passing per game, 94.6 yards rushing. We talked about it already, though, that this is a this is a San Jose State team that 6-3. The last 4 games have not gone great. They have 2 wins. They have a win versus Nevada, 35-31. Now, to note, that's not a rivalry game for them, and they played them very close. And I think that says something about the level of this team. They also beat Oregon State, but only barely, 24-13. And this is not a good Oregon State team. And so I don't think that this San Jose State team is a massive threat. I think that's what's going to hurt them primarily is that they're one-dimensional. You say, okay, their strength is going up against our weakness, but you could have said the same thing for Hawaii. And Boise State did a really solid job overall of being able to stop that. What hurts Boise State is when you have a 2-dimensional attack that's going to be able to hurt you in both phases, and especially when you have a mobile quarterback. He gets a little bit more mobile than Brown, 59 yards rushing and a touchdown this season on 12 carries, but he's not a significant mobile quarterback by any means. He's not a dual threat kind of guy. That's what Boise State struggled versus Nevada. That's what they struggled versus UNLV. An opportunity where they can hurt you in the ground and through the air and with a good running back. And San Jose State just doesn't have that. They are a primary pass-heavy team. And Boise State secondary, with a lot to prove this week. Now, the loss of Tubner is going to be a weakness that could potentially be exploited. It'll be interesting to see how Boise State bounces back in that area. But overall, this Boise State secondary that has stepped up well, and when Boise State's had to prepare for a one-dimensional offense, they have overall played quite well this season. And so even though it is a strength versus a weakness, I think that Chenander and Spencer Danielson are going to be well prepared for this program. And then you just look at Boise State, what they've done defensively this season. Yeah, they're giving up 247.1 yards passing per game, 112.2 yards rushing. But again, most of that came earlier on in the season. As we went over with the secondary, they played much better the back half of the year. And it's going to be a defense team overall, but especially a defense that's going to be coming in angry and with quite a bit of a chip on their shoulders. So for score predictions for this game, the experts, Vegas, that had no idea what was going on with the game last week, are predicting a 13.5-point win. I think this is going to be a big win. I think that Boise State is going to reestablish themselves. I think Ashton Jeanty is going to reestablish himself with an opportunity here versus a San Jose State team that's weak versus the pass, has to step back to cover that and gives him some opportunities. I think Maddox Madsen has a big rebound game this week. He's that kind of player that always comes back when the moment is the biggest. I think this is that kind of opportunity for him. I expect a lot of spraying the ball around the field, intentionally so, and a lot of big opportunities maybe in the deep passing game. It's something we really haven't seen that much out of Boise State this season. And I think that defensively for Boise State, they will do a pretty solid job of stopping this somewhat primarily one-dimensional offense for San Jose State. So I'm predicting a score prediction of Boise State 49, San Jose State 28 for a 21-point victory overall. So another touchdown and a half on top of what Vegas is predicting. So thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts if you haven't already in the comments below. And hey, if you already heard my score prediction, that's fine. Go ahead and put your score prediction in already. That's totally fine. No harm, no foul on that. So thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe. Make sure you guys stick around for the review video coming out after the game. And I would love to continue this discussion with all of you in the comments now on this video, but also in the comments for the review video as well. So like I said, thanks for sticking around to the end. And as always, go Big Blue!